The Maid's toddler apologized for asking for help with a drawing. The billionaire turned back and changed her life forever. The house on Caldwell Ridge was the kind of place that made people slow their cars just to look at it. Perched above the quiet town of Ashford, Virginia, the Whitmore estate stood like something out of a fairy tale, all stone and glass and perfectly manicured hedgerows, with a fountain at the center of the circular driveway that glittered even on cloudy days. People in town talked about it in the way they talked about things they would never touch, reverently, from a distance, with a kind of ache they couldn't quite name. Nathaniel Whitmore, 33 years old, had inherited the house when he was 26 and hadn't done a single thing to make it feel like a home since. He had, however, done remarkable things with the family's pharmaceutical empire, restructuring 3 failing subsidiaries, launching a pediatric research initiative that had earned him a profile in Forbes, and doubling the company's stock value in under 4 years. The world called him a prodigy. His board of directors called him the machine. He had no opinion on either label because he was almost never not working. He rose at 5:15 every morning. He ate breakfast at his desk, always the same thing, black coffee and a soft-boiled egg, while reading market reports on 2 separate monitors. His calendar was managed by his assistant, Priya, who had once joked, only half joking, that Nathaniel Whitmore's heart beat in 15-minute intervals. He had a gym on the 3rd floor he used every day for exactly 45 minutes. He had a library he had not opened a book in for almost 2 years. He had a dining room with a table that seated 14, and he ate alone at it every evening, if he ate dinner at all. He was not unhappy, he told himself. He was focused. There was a difference. The household staff was small but efficient. A groundskeeper named Harold, who was pushing 70 and had worked for the Whitmore family for 30 years. A twice-weekly chef named Marco, who left labeled containers in the refrigerator, and a housekeeper who came every Monday and Thursday. The previous housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Galloway, had retired in February, and Priya had quietly arranged for a replacement through a local agency. Nathaniel had not been consulted. He didn't particularly want to be. He just needed someone capable of managing the house without requiring his attention. The new housekeeper arrived on a Wednesday morning in early April, when the dogwoods along the driveway were just beginning to bloom. Nathaniel saw her car, an aged silver Honda with a dented rear bumper, pull up the drive from his office window on the 2nd floor. He watched long enough to register that she was young, perhaps late 20s, with dark hair pulled back into a practical knot, wearing a crisp white blouse she had clearly ironed with care. She had a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, and she was holding the hand of a very small child. He frowned slightly. Priya had not mentioned a child. He turned back to his monitor. Her name, he would learn from the updated employee file Priya sent that afternoon, was Sana Reyes. 28 years old. Originally from Sacramento. Had worked 3 years as a housekeeper for a family in Richmond before relocating to Ashford 6 months ago. References? Excellent. The child, her daughter Lily, was 3. The agency notes mentioned that Sana had requested permission to occasionally bring her daughter on work days when the child's daycare was closed, and that the previous household manager had approved this arrangement provisionally. Nathaniel had no previous household manager, and so technically no one had approved anything. He sat with this fact for a moment. Then he decided it wasn't worth addressing and sent Priya a one-line reply, "Fine." He didn't expect to notice either of them. His house was large enough, and his attention narrow enough, that people could move through it like water and leave no trace. He had trained himself to pay attention only to what required his attention. A housekeeper and her toddler daughter did not require his attention. That was what he thought on that first Wednesday in April, when the dogwoods were blooming and the fountain was sparkling, and Sana Reyes walked up the front steps of his house with her little girl's hand folded in hers, both of them looking up at the stone facade with expressions he would have described, if anyone had asked him, as quiet courage. Nobody asked him. He went back to work. But that evening, walking from the kitchen to his office with a glass of water he wouldn't drink, He passed the hallway off the east wing and heard something he hadn't heard inside these walls in longer than he could remember. A child's laughter.
Small, round,
Completely unself-conscious. It rolled down the corridor like a marble, bright and uncontained, and Nathaniel Whitmore stopped walking for 3 full seconds before he remembered where he was going. He did not go to investigate. He told himself he had forgotten the sound was strange. He almost believed it. She had not planned on any of this. Sana Reyes had planned on finishing her accounting degree by 24, marrying the man she loved, and building something steady and ordinary in the way that steady and ordinary things are miraculous to those who have never had them. She had planned on a modest apartment with a balcony, a reliable car, a savings account that grew. She had planned on a daughter, though not quite yet, and when Lily arrived early and unplanned, Sana had shifted everything and loved her with the kind of ferocity that rearranges a person's entire interior landscape. That part she had not expected to be so easy. The rest had proven harder. Marco, Lily's father, had been kind and then unkind, and then simply absent. He had left when Lily was 14 months old, citing pressures she no longer had the energy to analyze. He sent money occasionally, inconsistently. He texted on Lily's birthday and sometimes remembered it was the right date and sometimes didn't. Sana had stopped expecting anything from him, which made his sporadic appearances easier to absorb and his absences meaningless. She was good at making things meaningless that she couldn't change. She had moved from Sacramento to Richmond for a housekeeping job with good pay and flexible hours, found a daycare she trusted, and built something like a routine. She was good at her work, thorough, quiet, efficient, with an eye for detail that her supervisor in Richmond had called, with admiring bewilderment, almost uncanny. She noticed when a picture frame was a 1/4 inch off center. She noticed when the wood grain of a table needed conditioning before it showed stress. She noticed things that were invisible to most people, probably because she had spent years noticing everything, scanning every room she entered, reading silently for safety or for opportunity. Old habit. Hard to break. Then the Richmond family had relocated abroad, and Sana had needed a new placement. The agency had offered her the Whitmore estate at nearly double the pay she had been earning with benefits. She had stood in the agency's small waiting room reading the job description for a long time, aware that Lily's daycare fees were increasing in September, aware that her car needed new tires, aware that her savings were exactly the amount she referred to privately as the "oh no" fund, enough to cover one emergency, not two.
She took the job.
The house had startled her. She had known it was large. She had not expected it to feel so empty. Not messy or neglected. It was meticulously maintained, as if someone had decreed that every surface would be kept perfect and then forgotten to fill the perfection with anything human. The rooms were beautiful and airless. The kitchen gleamed and smelled of nothing. The library had books arranged by height and color, not subject, a decorative choice, she noted, that meant no one was actually reading them. In the entire second floor, which she cleaned on her first Thursday, she found no photographs. Not one. She cleaned efficiently and asked Harold, the groundskeeper, quiet questions to orient herself. He was gruff and warm in the way of men who've decided not to pretend anymore, and he told her everything she needed to know in the first half hour. Mr. Whitmore worked constantly, valued his privacy intensely, didn't want conversation, and was, in Harold's word, not unkind. Just somewhere else, even when he was standing in front of you. Sana understood this. She had known people who lived behind glass, who were present without being reachable. She had learned not to take it personally. She would clean his house and do her job well, and keep Lily quiet on the days she brought her in, and she would not require anything of Nathaniel Whitmore that he wasn't offering. Lily was good generally about the rules. She was a serious child in some ways, given to long observations and careful handling of things, which Sana recognized as her own traits come back to haunt her in miniature, and she understood that the big house required quiet. She would sit with her crayons and paper in whatever room Sana was working in, drawing with a focused intensity that struck strangers as unusual in a 3-year-old. She drew houses and trees and stick figures with elaborate details, hats, buttons, different colored shoes. She narrated her drawings in a murmured undertone that was barely louder than breathing. On the third Wednesday of April, Lily was having a harder day. She had woken at 5 with a slight fever that broke by 9, leaving her clingy and out of sorts, and her daycare had asked Sanaa not to bring her in. Sanaa had no choice but to bring her to the estate, settling Lily in the small sitting room off the kitchen with her crayon tin and a stack of white paper while Sanaa worked her way through the laundry and the West Wing bathrooms. She was halfway through the hallway by the main staircase when she heard Lily's small feet padding across the marble floor, faster than they should have been, which meant the crayons hadn't held her attention. Sanaa turned. Lily was not heading for her. She was heading, with the single-minded confidence of a 3-year-old who has not yet learned about invisible social barriers, toward the half-open door of the study on the first floor, the room where, on this particular Wednesday morning, Nathaniel Whitmore happened to be taking a rare break from his desk to stand at the window with a cup of coffee, looking at nothing. "Lily," Sanaa said quietly, already moving. But Lily had already reached the doorway. She stopped, looked in, and announced, "I drawed a house, but I can't make the chimney right." There was silence. Sanaa reached her daughter in 3 long strides, scooped her up, pressed Lily's face gently but firmly against her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said, looking into the room. "She got away from me. It won't happen again." Nathaniel Whitmore stood at the window with his coffee cup, looking at them both. His expression was, "She would think about this later," not annoyed. Not precisely. It was more like a man who had forgotten there were sounds like that in the world, and was recalculating. "It's fine," he said. His voice was even. "She wasn't bothering me." "Still," Sanaa said, "I apologize." She shifted Lily on her hip. "Say sorry, baby." Lily, from the safety of her mother's shoulder, turned her head and looked at the tall man by the window. Then she said, in her most dignified small voice, "Sorry for asking." And something in those 4 words, "sorry for asking," passed across Nathaniel Whitmore's face too quickly for Sanaa to name it. Not pity. Not amusement. Something older and heavier than either. "Don't be," he said. He looked at the child for exactly 3 more seconds. Then he looked at his coffee cup. Then he walked back to his desk. Sanaa carried Lily back to the kitchen and sat her down with new paper, and her hands were steady, but her heart was beating harder than it should have been, and she couldn't have said why. It was the chimney that started it. Nathaniel did not go back to his email right away. He stood at his desk for a moment with his hand on the mouse, and the words, "sorry for asking," sat somewhere behind his sternum in a way he couldn't immediately file or dismiss. He was a man who had learned, long ago, to notice the things that resisted filing. They had a way of being important. He told himself it was nothing. A child's phrase. Random. He pulled up the quarterly projections. He closed the quarterly projections. He walked, without quite deciding to, out of the study and down the hallway and into the kitchen, where Sanaa Reyes was folding dish towels with the precise, automatic efficiency of someone whose hands know what to do while the rest of her is elsewhere. Her daughter was at the kitchen table with crayons, bent over a piece of paper, brow furrowed in concentration. The house Lily had drawn was recognizable as a house, if you were paying attention, a square with a door, 2 windows, stick trees on either side, and a sky with a lopsided sun. But at the top of the square was a crooked rectangle that veered to the right and then stopped, unresolved. The chimney. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. Sanaa looked up and went very still. "I wasn't," she started. "May I?" he said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Lily. Sanaa blinked. "Of course." He walked to the table. Lily looked up at him with the frank, undefended curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to be wary of tall men in expensive clothes. She considered him carefully, then looked back at her drawing. "The chimney," she said, by way of explanation. "I see it," he said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Sanaa, behind him, went very quietly still. He picked up the red crayon that was nearest to him, not asking, which would have slowed things down, and turned the paper slightly toward himself. "May I show you something?" Lily looked at her drawing, then at him, then back at the drawing, performing the calculation. "Okay," she said. He drew a small chimney in the corner of a fresh sheet of paper first. A rectangle, slightly narrower at the top, with two small lines for smoke curling up. He pushed it toward her.
See?
The chimney sits right on top of the roof line, like it grew there. Lily studied it. She picked up a brown crayon and looked from his example to her drawing, her small brow still creased. Then she tried again, slowly, on her own drawing, and this time the chimney landed on the roofline, not beside it. Small. A little wobbly.
Hers.
She looked at it for a long moment. "There," she said, with a satisfaction so complete it was almost formal. Nathaniel looked at the drawing. Something moved in his face. Not a smile, exactly, but a softening, a slight release of something that had been held for a long time. "There," he agreed. He pushed back his chair. Sanaa was watching him with an expression she was working hard to keep neutral, but something moved in her dark eyes. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of surprised reassessment, as though she was quietly updating a file. He noticed this because he noticed most things, even the things he told himself not to. "Thank you," Sanaa said quietly. "For the time. You didn't have to." "I know," he said. He straightened his cuff. "She's good. The trees especially. The proportion is better than you'd expect." Sanaa looked at the drawing as if seeing it freshly. "She's been drawing since before she could really talk," she said, and he caught the specific tenderness in that. Not performance, just fact. The kind of pride that doesn't need an audience. "Her daycare teacher says the same thing." Nathaniel nodded once. He looked at Lily, who was now adding a second chimney to the other side of her house, because apparently one chimney, now that she could make them, was not enough. He walked back toward the study. He paused in the doorway. "If she wants paper," he said without turning around, "there's a ream of cardstock in the supply closet off the library. Better for drawings. It doesn't bleed." He paused again. "If that would be useful." He heard Sanaa say, very softly, "That would be very useful. Thank you." He went back to his desk. He was more productive that afternoon than he had been in weeks. He didn't examine why. Over the following days, something slow and quiet began to change in the quality of the house's silence. Not dramatically, he would have noticed dramatic, but in the way a room changes when someone opens a window, when the temperature shifts a degree or two, when air that had been perfectly still begins to suggest the possibility of movement. He started, without intending to time his coffee break to coincide with the hours Sanaa worked. He didn't tell himself this was what he was doing. He was simply in the kitchen more often than usual. He noticed things about her in the way he noticed everything, precisely, involuntarily, without editorializing. She worked with a completeness that satisfied some part of him that had very high standards and was rarely satisfied. She didn't perform effort. She simply applied it, evenly, without drama. When Lily was with her, she managed the child with a patience that was not the thin, practiced kind, not the patience of someone counting down, but the real thing, the kind grown from genuine love and the particular confidence of a woman who has stopped expecting help and learned to be enough. She was careful around him. Professional. She said good morning and moved out of his way, and thanked him when he said things didn't need to be apologized for. She did not ask him questions. She did not try to make conversation. He both appreciated this and found himself, on certain afternoons, wanting to breach it somehow, wanting to say something that was not about the house or the schedule or the laundry. He didn't. He was good at not doing things that complicated his life. But one Thursday, he passed the library and heard Sanaa's voice, low, unhurried, reading aloud to Lily from a picture book she'd taken from the bottom shelf, one of the very few that had actual children's stories in them, buried beneath the architectural books and company histories. She hadn't known he was there. She read with expression, changing her voice slightly for the different characters, and Lily was pressed against her side on the window seat, watching the pictures with that focused seriousness, and the late afternoon light came through the tall library windows and lay across them both in a way that stopped him completely in the doorway. He stood there for he didn't know how long. Long enough. He walked away before she saw him. His chest felt strange for the rest of the evening, and he went to the gym and ran 4 miles instead of his usual 2, and didn't sleep particularly well, and in the morning he sat down at his desk and made himself stop thinking about window light. He was mostly successful. It was Harold who told him first, the way Harold told him most things he needed to know about the actual texture of life. Obliquely, and while doing something else entirely. It was a Saturday, which meant Nathaniel wasn't working, or rather, he was working, but the pretense of weekend made him restless, and he ended up walking the grounds in the late morning while Harold pruned the rose hedges along the east wall. Harold always made himself available to be talked at without making any indication that he was doing so, which Nathaniel had appreciated for 30 years. "Reyes is good," Harold said, without looking up from his shears. "She is," Nathaniel agreed. "Girl's something else." He meant Lily. "Came out and talked to me for 20 minutes about what I was doing with the roses. 3 years old. Asked me why they need to be cut." He paused. "I told her. She told me that was sad, but maybe the roses felt better after, like a haircut." He snipped a branch. "Not wrong, actually." Nathaniel almost smiled. "Her situation's not easy," Harold continued, still not looking at him. "Single mother, no family nearby. I think she's got a sister in San Diego. She works 2 jobs, this one and a few hours a week at that bakery in town on the weekends." Nathaniel looked at him. 2 jobs. The daycare fees went up in September. "And the car needs work. I heard her on the phone last week. Something with the transmission." He snipped another branch. "Didn't tell you, for any particular reason. Just it's a big house. Easy to forget people have whole lives that don't stop at the front gate." He didn't say anything else. Nathaniel stood there for a moment, then walked back inside. He sat in the library for a long time that afternoon, not reading. He was a man who had built a career on solving problems. Whole departments existed to analyze challenges and produce solutions, and he had spent a decade becoming very good at identifying the levers and turning them. He was not accustomed to problems that didn't want solving, or to people whose lives he couldn't simply improve by reallocating resources. He understood that there were contexts in which this was inappropriate, that there were people who didn't want to be handled, who had dignity that would be bruised by interference. He also understood that a woman working 2 jobs and worrying about her transmission while making sure her daughter said please and drew chimneys correctly was a kind of quiet heroism the world consistently undertook on the assumption nobody would notice. He noticed. He thought for a very long time about what, if anything, it was appropriate to do with that noticing. The following Wednesday, he was in the kitchen when Sanaa arrived. This was unusual. He was normally in his office by the time she started, and she paused slightly in the doorway when she saw him, then composed herself and said good morning. Lily was with her, wearing a yellow rain jacket that had a small duck embroidered on the collar, and she looked up at Nathaniel with the immediate comfort of a child who has decided, based on the chimney incident, that this man is fundamentally safe.
"Mornin'," Lily said. "Good morning," he said.
He had a folder on the kitchen table.
He looked at it.
He had spent 3 days preparing what was in it and being precise about it, because imprecision here felt unkind. He pushed it towards Sanaa. She looked at him. She didn't pick it up. "It's an employment review," he said. "Effective this quarter. The position has been reclassified upward. The role was being compensated below market rate, which was an oversight from the original agency arrangement. The corrected salary is in there, along with the benefits package update, including dependent health care coverage." He paused. "The car allowance on the second page is discretionary. The estate has vehicles that sit unused, and it's more practical than the alternative." Sanaa looked at the folder. A long silence. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully. I don't need." "I know," he said. "The reclassification is legitimate." Priya confirmed it against industry benchmarks. He said this not to shut her down, but because he knew that pride required a framework, and he had tried to build her one. "You're not being given anything. The previous rate was simply wrong." She looked at him for a moment, studying him the way she sometimes did when she was deciding what was true, and then she looked at the folder, and then she pressed her lips together once, tightly, and picked it up. She didn't open it. She held it against her chest. "The car allowance," she said quietly. Her voice was very steady. He suspected this cost her something. "Is for Lily," he said. "Practically speaking." She was quiet for a long moment. Lily had found the fruit bowl and was examining an orange with great scientific interest. "You didn't have to do this," Sanaa said finally. Her voice had gone soft. "I know," he said again. "I wanted to." He found, to his mild surprise, that this was simply true. She looked up at him then, fully, directly, in a way she had been very careful not to do in the weeks she had worked for him. And he looked back. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Harold was doing something with a wheelbarrow that involved considerable gravel displacement. "Thank you," she said. Just that. But the way she said it, with the whole weight of what she was carrying, what she had been carrying alone, made it sound like something much larger. He received it the way it was given. He nodded once. He walked back toward his office. Behind him, from the direction of the fruit bowl, he heard Lily say, "Mama, can I have the orange?" And Sanaa said, "Yes, baby. Yes, you can." And he walked up the stairs feeling something in his chest that was neither focused nor efficient, that had no entry in his calendar and no place in a quarterly report, and that he had not felt, he realized with something that was not quite surprise and not quite grief, in a very long time. He would not name it yet. He was careful about naming things. But he recognized it. It was the feeling of a window opening. The changes came the way spring comes, not all at once, but in accumulations so gradual you could almost miss each one, and then one morning you looked up, and everything was different. Nathaniel started eating dinner at a reasonable hour. This was noticed first by Marco, who began leaving meals that required actual reheating rather than the refrigerated containers he'd been providing for years. Then it was noticed by Priya, who stopped sending him 8 p.m. emails because, for the first time in 4 years, he was not reliably online at 8 p.m. to receive them. He didn't exactly know when it had started, the recalibration of his days. He suspected it had something to do with Wednesday and Thursday mornings becoming the most purposeful hours of his week, which was a disquieting realization for a man who had always believed his purpose lived in his work. He began to take his morning coffee in the kitchen instead of his office, and this meant he was there when Sanaa arrived, and there were 15 or 20 minutes every Wednesday in which they existed in the same room before the day properly began, and the conversation was not about schedules or laundry or the estate. It was about everything else, small and genuine things, the currency of people beginning to trust each other. He learned that she had studied accounting for 2 years before Marco and Lily rerouted her, and that she didn't regret either the rerouting or the path she'd had to build sideways. He learned that she could do a crossword puzzle in under 12 minutes on a good day, and that she preferred crosswords to her phone because they didn't try to sell her anything. He learned that she hated the smell of artificial vanilla but loved real vanilla, could tell the difference in a baked good from across her room, and had considered culinary school for approximately 6 weeks before deciding the joy of cooking didn't survive being paid to do it. He learned that she sang to Lily every night at bedtime, songs she made up herself, small inventions of melody and wordplay, and that Lily corrected her when she got the words wrong, which was often because consistency was not where Sanaa's musical talents resided. He shared things too, in the careful and unpracticed way of someone relearning the habit. He told her about the Pediatric Research Initiative, not in the corporate presentation language he used with his board, but the real version, The version where the origin was a 7-year-old nephew who had survived leukemia and a moment in a hospital hallway when Nathaniel had stood outside the oncology ward and decided that the money his family had accumulated was going to mean something. He told her about the library, admitted that the books were shelved decoratively because he'd hired a designer who made things beautiful and he hadn't been paying enough attention to correct it. She had laughed at this, a real laugh, unguarded, and then looked apologetic, and he had told her, with more warmth than he usually allowed himself, not to stop. And she had not stopped. It was one of the things he most valued about her, that once she had decided he was safe, she was honest. Unsparingly so. She told him his office was the loneliest room in the house. She told him the dining room table for 14 was a strange choice for a man who ate alone. She told him, once, on a Thursday morning when Lily was drawing suns on cardstock at the kitchen table and the coffee was particularly good, that she thought he was the most capable, unhappy person she had ever met. He had been quiet for a long time after that. "I'm not unhappy," he said. She had looked at him in the patient, level way she had, the way that said she was not going to argue, just observe. "Okay," she said simply. He thought about it for days afterward. He thought about it in his office, which was perhaps the loneliest room in the house. He thought about it at the dining table for 14. He thought about it when he passed the library and saw the books rearranged, not by his instruction, but someone had quietly, over the preceding weeks, been reorganizing them by subject and author. He had stood in the library doorway one evening staring at the shelves and realized that Sanaa had done this one Thursday at a time, without saying anything because she thought the library should be a library and she was right, and she had known he needed it to become one before he knew it himself. He went in and took a book out for the first time in 2 years. He sat down and read it, and it was good, and the library was warm, and outside Harold was putting in the summer garden, and Lily's drawings were pinned to the corkboard in the kitchen where Sanaa had asked permission to put them, and Nathaniel sat reading until the sun went down and thought, this is something. For Lily's part, she had adopted him into her world with the completeness and absence of self-consciousness that only small children are capable of. She began leaving drawings for him on his desk, placed there by Sanaa only when Lily insisted with enough persistence, which was a very low bar, and once left him a drawing of what she earnestly explained was you and me and Mama and Harold and the roses, in which all 4 humans were roughly the same height and had the same number of fingers, which, she informed him, was correct because she had counted. He had framed this drawing. He hadn't told anyone he'd done it. She asked him questions the way she asked Harold questions, with the assumption that he knew things and would tell her. She asked him why the fountain ran all day. She asked him where the birds went at night. She asked him, on a morning in May when the light was coming through the kitchen windows in long golden bars, if he lived in the big house all by himself, and when he said yes, she looked at him with something that was not pity, but was adjacent to it, a child's version of concern. "Doesn't that feel big?" she asked. "It does," he said. "Yes." She considered this. "We have a small house," she said. "But Mama and me are in it, so it feels right." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Sanaa, who was standing at the counter with a dish towel and an expression he couldn't fully read but suspected she couldn't either. "Yes," he said quietly. "I understand that." The Saturday afternoon in early June when he finally told Sanaa how he felt, they were in the kitchen, because they were always in the kitchen, which had become the most alive room in the house, and Lily was asleep on the small settee in the sitting room off the kitchen, worn out from a morning helping Harold identify what he was willing to call her contribution to the planting of the summer annuals. The house was quiet in the way it had learned to be recently, which was different from the way it had been quiet before. Not empty quiet, but full quiet, the silence of things settled and held. Nathaniel said, without preamble, because he had found that with her, preamble always felt like a delay of something necessary, "I would like to tell you something, and I would like you to tell me honestly what you think of it." She put down the dish towel. He said it carefully and precisely because he was those things, and because she deserved to have it clearly. He said that somewhere in the past 3 months he had started being, for the first time in longer than he could reliably account for, genuinely happy. Not the absence of distress that he had previously mistaken for contentment, but actual happiness, identifiable and real, and that it was specifically connected to her, to who she was and how she moved through the world, and what she had, without trying to, made of his house and his mornings and his days. He said he understood the complications, that she worked for him, that this was consequential, that he would never want her to feel anything other than completely free to say that she didn't share the feeling and have it affect nothing between them. He said he had thought carefully about whether it was right to say this, and had concluded that she had earned the truth from him. Then he stopped talking. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a bird was doing something ambitious in the rose hedge. Harold's radio drifted faintly from the direction of the greenhouse. Then she said, "How long have you known?" "A while," he admitted. "You?" She looked at him. "The library," she said. "When you started reading again. I thought, he's coming back. And I was glad." She paused. "I've been glad about you for a while, Nathaniel." It was the first time she had used his name. He felt it land somewhere important. Then he said, "Perhaps we could start." "Start what?" she said, though she was smiling and she knew. "Being glad," he said. "Together. For a while. And then longer." She looked at him for a moment that stretched wide and warm and quiet. "Okay," she said. Simply, completely. "Yes." From the sitting room, in the particular sleep-aware way of small children, Lily shifted on the settee and said, without opening her eyes, "Mama?" "I'm here," Sanaa called softly. "Sleep, baby." There was a small, satisfied exhale. Then silence. Nathaniel looked at the door of the sitting room where Lily slept, and then at Sanaa, and something in his face opened in a way it hadn't for years. "She's remarkable," he said. "She is," Sanaa agreed. Her voice was warm and sure. "She gets it from somewhere." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real one, full and unhurried, and the kitchen held them both in the afternoon light. By September, the dining room table for 14 had been moved. Not discarded. Nathaniel was not a man for theatrical gestures, but repositioned to one side of the room, where it served beautifully as a surface for the occasions when it was actually needed, which were beginning to be more frequent. In its place, in the warm center of the room, was a smaller table, round, oak, worn beautifully at the edges, something Sanaa had found at an antique shop in Ashford and mentioned, offhandedly, in the way she mentioned things she had made herself stop wanting, because wanting felt like presumption. He had gone to the shop the next day and bought it, and had it installed while she wasn't at the house, and on the first morning she'd walked in and seen it she had stood very still, and then turned around and looked at him, and he had simply looked back, and neither of them had said anything because some things don't need to be said. The library was now, unambiguously, a library. Its books were organized with a system both logical and personal, sections for science, for history, for fiction, for poetry, with a low shelf along the bottom dedicated entirely to children's books, which was growing with quiet regularity. Lily had her own reading corner in the library now, a small armchair in rust-colored velvet that she had pointed at in a furniture catalog Sanaa had been browsing and said, with complete certainty, that one. And that had arrived 3 weeks later. She did not yet read in it, but she sat in it and was read to, and sometimes she sat in it alone and held books and looked at them with focused seriousness, learning the shape of words before she could decode them. The estate had changed in ways that were hard to catalog individually, but were impossible to miss collectively. There were flowers on the kitchen table now. Harold grew them, and left them without being asked, which was a form of commentary from a man who expressed everything through his garden. There were drawings on the corkboard, and a chalkboard on the wall of the mudroom that Lily used for letters, and that sometimes had actual words on it, painstaking and large, that no one was supposed to comment on unless Lily showed them herself. There was a sound in the house almost every day now, not noise but sound, Music from the kitchen sometimes, or a podcast Sanaa listened to while she worked, or Lily's running commentary on whatever she was currently examining, or the particular quality of Nathaniel's voice on a phone call that was going well, warmer and faster than his work voice, the voice she had come to think of as his true one. Nathaniel had restructured his days. Not dramatically, not with the sweeping efficiency he applied to corporate problems. He understood that this required different tools, but steadily and with intention. He blocked his mornings differently. He took Sundays off, genuinely, for the first time since he could remember, and found that he was more useful on Mondays for it, and that this was not the most important reason to do it. He had dinner with Sanaa and Lily on the nights they stayed late, which became most nights, and they ate at the round oak table in the warm dining room, and Lily told them what she had observed that day. Her reports were comprehensive and occasionally startling, and Nathaniel listened to her the way he had always listened to things that mattered, with his complete and undivided attention. In October, Sanaa gave notice at the bakery. Nathaniel had not asked her to. She had made the decision herself, because the daycare, the driving, the weekends, the exhaustion were no longer necessary configurations to survive. She told him on a Thursday morning, and he had said he was glad, that he'd worried about the hours, and she had said, without drama, that she'd been carrying more than she needed to for a long time, and it was surprisingly good to put some of it down. He had understood this in a specific and personal way. They had sat with it together, quietly over coffee. Lily turned 4 in November, and the party was held at the estate because the estate now had that particular quality, warmth and dimension and signs of life, that made it a good place to gather. Harold grew the most improbably late roses for the table arrangements. Marco made a cake with yellow roses on it because Lily had requested specifically yellow, and the roses were the kind you could also eat, which she was informed of after her first bite and received as revelatory information. Sanaa's sister came from San Diego, a quick and laughing woman named Carmen who assessed Nathaniel in the first 10 minutes with an accuracy that made him feel like he'd been gently x-rayed, and then approved him with a completeness that felt like being given a key. In the photographs from that party, and there were photographs now on the walls, slowly accumulating, you could see Nathaniel kneeling on the lawn with Lily on his back, both of them with expressions of pure, uncomplicated delight. You could see Sanaa laughing with Carmen in the golden afternoon, her head thrown back, wearing a dress the color of wine. You could see Harold in the background pulling roses and pretending not to be moved by any of it, and not succeeding. Nathaniel had the photograph from the lawn framed first. He put it in the library, on the shelf at eye level. It was not that everything was uncomplicated. Real things never are, and they had spoken honestly about this, about the asymmetries of their circumstances, about the pace that felt right, about the importance of getting things right not just for them but for Lily, who was watching and learning and building her understanding of how people should treat each other from what she saw in the room she lived in. Nathaniel understood this weight and received it seriously. He had held it clearly from the beginning, that Lily was not background, not context, not a pleasant addition to an otherwise simple arrangement. She was the center. She had been, from the first Wednesday in April, before he'd known enough to name it, the door through which he'd walked back into his own life. He told Sanaa this on a December evening, when the first hard frost had come, and the grounds were silver and still, and Lily was asleep upstairs with a book still open on her pillow, and the house was lit from inside with the warm, specific light of a place where people lived and meant to keep doing so. She asked to help someone, he said, and apologized for it. 3 years old. Already had learned to make herself smaller. He was quiet for a moment. That's not on you. She didn't learn it from you. But it undid me. The idea that someone that small, that bright, was already sorry for asking. Sanaa was looking at him steadily. I thought about what it would mean, he said, to be the kind of person she didn't have to apologize to. To be the kind of place, the kind of home, where that reflex just didn't form. Where she knew, all the way down, that asking was safe. Sanaa was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You are. He looked at her. That place, she said. You are. She paused. We are. He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him, and held back, steady and sure and full. Outside, the frost lay across the gardens Harold had put to sleep for winter. The fountain had been turned off for the season, and the driveway was quiet, and the stone house on Caldwell Ridge stood lit from within with the warm, particular, irreducible light of a home, which is not a size or a style or a number on a deed, but a feeling, specific and known, the feeling of being exactly where you are meant to be, with exactly the people you are meant to be with, and knowing it, and choosing it every single morning. Upstairs, Lily slept with her book and her drawings and her small fierce certainty that the world was a place worth examining closely, worth drawing carefully, worth asking about, and she did not apologize for any of it, not anymore. She would grow up in a house where questions landed safely and love was specific and lasting and shown in the kind of everyday, accumulating, chimney-fixing ways that matter most. She would grow up knowing she was worth the full measure of someone's attention, because she had always been. From the very first morning, she walked down a marble hallway toward a half-open door and said, with confidence, that her chimney wasn't right. She had been right about the chimney. She had been right about everything. And in the warm lit rooms below, her mother and the man who had turned back, who had learned to turn back and keep turning, sat together at the round oak table in the glow of December and were, quite simply and extraordinarily, home. The end.